Petrol's not getting any cheaper, and not everyone can afford to buy a new Tesla to reduce their fuel bill. So here are 7 things that you can do to save money and reduce the amount of fuel that you use. Number 1 is to always plan your trips so that you're going from a place up high to a place down low. That way you're going downhill the whole time, and you basically don't really need to use any fuel. And the second thing is to use aerodynamics to your advantage. A bit like this cyclist you can see here drafting off a truck. He's saving a lot of energy. There's no way he could ride that fast. Of course, those aren't good tips at all. They're very unsafe and probably not good for your brake pads going downhill the whole time. But what you can do, talking of braking, the biggest thing you can do is to conserve kinetic energy. Instead of driving in a stop-start manner where you accelerate really hard and then, oh no, you see a traffic light and you have to suddenly slam on the brakes, all of that stopping and starting really wastes energy. You're much better if you can anticipate changes in traffic. That way you might go a little bit slower, but you actually, overall, you basically go the same. It takes you the same amount of time because you're not having to stop and start as much, and you're saving a lot of fuel because to go from 0 to 60 k's an hour uses a lot of petrol, just that initial going from nothing to a relatively high speed. Whereas if you're able to keep coasting at close to 60 k's an hour, you'll be doing pretty well. The second thing to do is to look at your tyre pressure. Even a small reduction in the amount of air that you have in your tyres will result in a relatively large inefficiency. You want to get the tyre gauge out, make sure you've got them properly inflated. Another thing to do, which is somewhat counterintuitive, is that sometimes it's actually better to use air conditioning. It seems like air conditioning would be a waste of fuel because it has to use the engine in order to be able to power the air conditioning. But at high speeds, it's actually better to use aircon because if you think about it, if you're going 100 kilometers an hour, the aerodynamic drag from having open windows wastes a lot of energy because your car has to fight back against the drag from the wind. The rule of thumb is if you're traveling slower than 100 kilometers per hour, open the window. Otherwise, you should be using aircon. Another thing to do is to get your car serviced regularly. Things like air filters that are clogged up or old oil can result in your car not running as well as it could. If you take it to a good mechanic, they'll tune it up and make it up to about 5% more fuel efficient according to some research. Do make sure that you take it to a reputable mechanic though, because I've definitely read reports of people taking their car in for a service and it ends up performing worse because the mechanic has done a dodgy thing and used cheap oil instead of the proper oil. Another thing that might be possible sometimes is to change when you are driving. Obviously, if you're driving at 5 p.m. during peak hour, it's going to be pretty busy and it's going to not be as easy to drive in a steady manner. You're going to have to stop and start all the time, even if you are anticipating the traffic ahead. But if you chose to do your errands at 3 a.m., for example, then you'd have the streets to yourself. Not always going to be possible, not always desirable, but where possible, if you can avoid peak hour, you're going to be doing better. Another thing to do, you've been out on a wonderful camping trip over the weekend, you've got all this gear in the back of your car, and you've been too busy on Sunday night to unpack it. Depending on how heavy it is, it can cause your engine to have to work quite a bit harder. So where possible, you want to ditch things that are heavy so that your car can be a light, fast machine. The other thing, of course, is to avoid having stuff on the top of your car, because that's going to be even worse than having the windows open. That aerodynamic drag is going to slow you down a lot. And if you have a car that looks a bit like a box, then even though I said this isn't about changing cars, you might want to have to look at getting a car that's a bit more aerodynamic. If you want some help in driving in a more fuel-efficient manner, there's a device called the GOFAR, which plugs into your diagnostics port. It uses accelerometers and the data from your car to figure out when you're driving in a suboptimal manner. When you're driving well, fuel efficiently, it'll flash lovely blue lights at you. And if you're driving a little bit heavy on the accelerator and the brake pedal, then it'll flash red lights at you to help you to drive in a more fuel efficient manner and also a safer manner. You can get one if you go to gofar.co.